The inevitable has happened and people are very mad about it. There are a lot of Toronto condos that are not under rent control because they were completed after November 15th, 2018. And I've done other videos trying to warn people about what was going to come with these buildings, especially because a lot of them are purpose-built rentals built by large corporations. And sure, sometimes a small-time landlord will not increase the rent just because they have a great tenant, but these big corporations build based on the fact they knew they were not under rent control, and they are not going to miss an opportunity to increase their profit margins. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Tom Storey. I make real estate educational videos specifically on the city of Toronto, but sometimes we talk about all of Canada. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you get any value from this video at all, please give it a like and also subscribe to the channel. My goal is still to get to 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And finally, after you watch this video, if you have any questions specifically for me, you can book a call in the first link in the description, a buyer call, a seller call, or just a call to chat about the market. Okay, I want to clarify a few things before we get into this article. Now, in 2017, the Ontario Liberals, they put in the Fair Housing Act, and part of that Fair Housing Act was rent control across the board. Now, that changed when Doug Ford and the Conservatives came into power, where Doug Ford made a new rule saying that anything built or completed after November 15th, 2018 is no longer in rent control. Now, we can agree or disagree about which one you believe was a better solution. When the Liberals put in the rent control, you saw a lot of new inventory not be built. And then when Doug Ford took away the rent control based on new buildings, you actually saw purpose-built rentals come to the market and give us more inventory. The problem is a lot of renters had no idea if they were in rent control or not in rent control, especially with these purpose-built buildings, because realtors aren't really involved in it. You go directly to the property management and put in your application. The person working there isn't going to tell you, hey, you're not in rent control. Are you sure you want to apply to this building? They work for the builder. Nothing they're doing is illegal, but it is obviously frustrating to renters, especially with the increase that we've seen in rent over the last year for properties that are coming to the market. What I'm talking about in this video is after that 1-year lease, what the rent becomes after that. Okay, so let's jump right into it here. We are going to go to the first article by blog.to, and it says residents of newly built Toronto building are outraged over massive rent increases. Okay, so news that Ontario landlords would be able to raise their rents as much as 2.5% a year had tenants outraged earlier in 2022, but residents of one Toronto building have it much worse. And by the way, this is not just one Toronto building. There are a lot of Toronto purpose-built rentals and condominium projects that were completed after November 15th, 2018 that are not in rent control. Now, in this specific case, we're talking about a building at Dupont and Christie, and they reached out directly to blog.to because they were not very happy about what happened. So in this one, RioCan owns it. They are a REIT. They build a lot of real estate and own a lot of real estate, mostly commercial real estate, across Canada. So don't go after RioCan specifically, like everyone's doing this. They're just the one in this article. So one resident who prefers to be identified just by his first name, Matt, tells blog.to, I live in a new purpose-built rental building owned by RioCan at Christie and Dupont. They have recently sent out lease renewals and are increasing rent by 13.4% and are not open to negotiation. So he shared a photo of the document from management. So it looks like what they basically did here is they gave him two options. So it was either 12 months. So you agree to a new rental cost at 12 months, which means you sign another full year, or you continue month to month, but it's going to be a 13% increase where the 12 month was only 8%. So they're giving them like an ultimatum on which one you're going to do. And you might say, well, don't take either of them, just move out. The problem is, since they first rented this property, rent has gone up even more than 13% across the entire city. So it's not going to be cheaper, and then you tack on moving costs. It says down here that he tried negotiating to a slightly lower increase for 3 months to have time to find a more affordable living arrangement, but each time management at RioCan decline. So this is not surprising to me. And it says down here that another resident reached out with a similar story, calling the massive rent increase a legal loophole as we are not covered by the Residential Tenancies Act. So I wouldn't say it's actually a legal loophole. This was public information that most of the tenants I really hope should have known about if they went into the situation. But I also understand if you're not actively, watching what's going on in the real estate world, you would have maybe not known. What the developer is doing, they're well within their right to do. But it's like, this is tough because I would actually argue that these purpose-built rental buildings are better for tenants. They're better managed. It's not just one landlord that's, across the country or I don't know, in another continent, but they're people that actually take it seriously. They have a management office. It's well run. There's all great amenities, but they're not under rent control. And these buildings are popping up everywhere. And I really feel bad for people that had no idea that this was potentially coming. Now, there's one more article I want to share with you, and this one is from the CBC. And it says, less than 1 year after tenants move into this new building, the landlord seeks a 7% rent hike. Now, not as much as the other one, but buildings constructed after 2018 are exempt from rental increase guidelines. The one thing I looked at down here was the increase came out of left field. The problem is it didn't come out of left field, but a lot of people just weren't educated about what the developer, or if you want to call them the landlord at this point, because it's purpose-built rental, what they were allowed to do. And it's going to put people in a lot of tough situations. So I see this from two different sides. If I'm a tenant and I rented in one of these buildings and I had no idea this was going to happen, I would be extremely frustrated. If I'm a landlord and my taxes, maintenance fees, let alone potential mortgage, if you're on a variable rate, has gone up, you should be able to increase rent by a certain percentage, which you are for 2.5% for buildings that were not built before 2018. But for all these new buildings, it's fair game. And unless someone changes the rent control rules, this isn't going to go anywhere, and you're going to continue to see these stories. So we're playing a very difficult and delicate game right now where you're going to have public outrage from people that didn't know because they weren't educated going into it. Now, I'd say people are responsible for their own decisions, but I do feel really bad for people that are in that circumstance. And then the other side is, well, if you put a blanket rent control across the entire city of Toronto or the province, that's been proven over time not to work either, because then we don't build more inventory because the pro formers don't work for the developers. So it's really tough to figure out here, which is the better solution. But the reality is, if they were going to go move somewhere else, the rent's probably going to be up 20% based on what has happened. I'd love to know your opinion, though. What do you think about this story? Would you be outraged if you were a tenant? If you were a landlord and you owned a property built after November 15th, 2018, would you increase the rent 10, 15%? Or would you keep it at 2.5% like all the other buildings? Anyways, I'm sure this will be a hot topic and a lot of discussion that goes on. Thank you so much for watching this video. My name is Tom Storey, and remember, home is where your story begins. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. You can learn more about the Storey Team at storeyteam.ca. We also have a weekly podcast called The Tom Storey Show, with new episodes each Sunday. If you'd like to book a call directly with Tom, you can do that via the first link in the description.